Wait, you have a TV?
No. I just like to read the TV guide. Read the TV guide. You don't need a TV.
Television addict! Television addict! Television addict!
Hey everybody, welcome to TV Guidance Counselor. I am Ken Reed, your TV Guidance Counselor, here once again to discuss classic television using back issues of TV Guide magazine from my personal collection as the gateway into our collective past. And this week, my guest's voice will be undoubtedly recognizable if you are a listener of the show or a fan of Rifftrax-er or MST3K. My guest is Mr. Kevin Murphy, who you may very well know as Tom Servo of the classic, well, Tom Servo 2, technically, of the classic MST3K episodes, but also does Rifftrax, is a great writer, has written some books, just a super good guy, and someone I wanted to have on the show for quite a while, and I was incredibly happy that he took some time out of his busy summer fishing schedule. I'm not being sarcastic, seriously. I am grateful for that, to come on the show and talk about the moon landing and all things TV circa 1969. I know you laughed when I said 69, but that's lockdowns change us all, everybody. This is a great episode. Had a lot of fun talking to him. So please sit back, relax, and enjoy this week's episode of TV Guidance Counselor with my guest, Kevin Murphy.
TV is my friend, and it has been always there for me in time of need.
Continuing the lockdown sessions, a voice that will no doubt be familiar to listeners of this show, Mr. Kevin Murphy. How are you, sir?
I'm okay, Ken, considering the state of the universe in general. I'm doing pretty damn well.
I mean, that's all you can do for now, and you've been filling the hole in your soul with fishing. Have you not?
Yeah, it's Minnesota this time of year is... It's how we keep the riffraff out,
Right.
Is that we present these brutal, bitter winters that linger on for 4, maybe 5 months, and then we have 6 months easily of the most blissful weather you can imagine. Yesterday it was like 80, 82. The fishing's been great. In the evening, you get a little gentle rain sometimes, and then you wake up and you can hear Vivaldi just playing in the air somehow.
I'm going to have to cut that all out. Otherwise, you'll blow up your spot and have everybody out there.
No way. No. Wait until December through April. If they make it that far, then they can stay.
Yeah, I mean, growing up in Boston, I thought I knew cold, and then I met someone who grew up in Minneapolis, and she told me that routinely her eyelashes would freeze together.
Yeah, I got the mustache thing going. I take a walk with my dog, and I get the snotsicles on my mustache.
Which sounds almost like a Dr. Seuss book. Snotsicles on mustaches.
Don't eat your snotsicles.
That's right. Weird side note. Have you seen Joe Pera's show on Adult Swim?
No.
Oh, man. It's Joe Pera Talks With You, and it all takes place in the UP.
Oh, wow.
And it's this like very gentle, weird, very funny, very Midwestern show that is very out of place in that block of programming, but is absolutely wonderful and has been a godsend in the last few months.
I love Youpers. There's nobody like Youpers.
Yeah, it's, I mean, Joe's stand-up was always great, but there's a whole episode where he is supposed to do the announcements at the local church, but instead goes on a big speech about how much he loves Baba O'Reilly, which he's just heard for the first time.
Wow.
It's pretty great.
I will look for that.
Yes. But speaking of older television, when I asked you what year you wanted to do, you had a couple of choices, and you were looking at some pretty formative years in the history of the United States. 1968 being one of them, one that has oddly come up quite often recently. I don't know why.
I think I could tell you, but...
you might have some theories. But we landed on the week of July 19th, 1969, which is of major significance for one very specific reason.
Because of Apollo 11 landing.
Before we get into the week, I am a big Elvis fan.
Oh, yeah.
People who've listened to the show have heard this story before, but you may find it amusing. I have all these bootlegs of just like raw footage of Elvis in the 70s, just like hanging around Vegas.
Oh, yeah.
And one of them is on whatever it is, July 20th, 1969, the night after the moon landing. And one of the Memphis Mafia guys like, "Hey, you see that moon landing last night?" And Elvis goes, "Nah, man, I was buried the beaver." I'm like,
There are so many stories like this about that man, especially at that time in his life.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Didn't see the moon landing. Buried in the beaver. Fantastic.
Well, it's funny because the other event that I think Ted Kennedy drove the car into Chappaquiddick and caused the death of Mary Jo Kopechne on Saturday.
Yes.
Before the moon landing on Sunday.
Maybe he did it on purpose, knowing the moon landing would overtake the news cycle.
Well, it certainly helped him stay out of the news cycle, that's for sure.
I will time this with the moon. I can get blotto that week. Teddy. So you didn't miss the moon landing, didn't you? Did you tell me that?
I missed seeing it on TV. I went to Boy Scout camp, and it was an odd time in my life because I was between 6th grade and going into junior high, and I desperately wanted to be cool. Because I was going from a Catholic grade school into a public junior high. And, I mean, this was a very culturally and ethnically mixed junior high, and there were a lot of what you'd call tough kids. There were none of those in my Catholic school, not really, pretend tough kids. So I really wanted to be cool, and going to Boy Scout camp was not the cool thing to do.
It is Catholic school tough.
Yeah, I guess so. You get to carry knives around and you learn how to shoot firearms and things like that. But my parents insisted. I actually had thought about acting sick so that I could stay home and watch the moon landing. But no, I was going to be in a summer camp in Oxford, Wisconsin for the whole goddamn moon shot. So
wow. This was a sleepaway camp. This was like an overnight.
Oh, yeah, this was a week long.
Oh, wow. I've never gone to camp. I got signed up for Dave Cowan's basketball camp, fast break basketball camp, and I didn't even make it till dinner. I was like, I'm not sleeping here. I'm out of here.
Now, this is packed in, your tent the whole time, sleeping bag. If you're smart enough, you bring a cot so you're not on the floor, because when it rains and you're sleeping on the ground in Boy Scout camp, you get wet unless you know what you're doing.
Did you at least get a specific merit badge for this? I know you probably didn't get a I missed the moon landing merit badge.
No, I got a shit ton of merit badges just because they were just so easy to do, and you could bamboo whoever the scoutmaster was who was administering the merit badge. But what I ended up doing was, we were supposed to go to a council fire that night, every night, especially on the weekends, and this was happening on Sunday. There'd be this kumbaya sort of council fire, and everyone go, and there'd be skits and sing songs. And I just played sick so that I could listen to the moon landing on my radio. I brought my little pocket radio with me and an extra couple of sets of batteries. And it's a good thing because I wore through 3 batteries that night listening to this thing because I had it on all night.
Oh, yeah.
On all night. It was actually, the moon landing was scheduled to happen at like 3 in the morning Eastern time or 4 in the morning. But they ended up moving up the schedule 5 hours. And so just before 10 p.m. Central, Neil Armstrong stepped on the moon, and I got to hear the whole thing. And I guess that was okay because it was easier for me to imagine in my mind's eye than watching those really awful video transmissions.
Yeah, that was what I was going to say. When did you finally see the actual footage?
I saw, it was all over the news, when I got back, and there was that, I got the Life and the Time and the Newsweek special editions that had actually the pictures that they took when they returned, those beautiful Hasselblad pictures.
Oh, yeah.
That were gorgeous and so much different than the experience of seeing it on video where you could barely see what the hell was going on.
Yeah, it looked like a really bad Lucy kinescope.
Well, you can understand why conspiracy theorists would say that didn't happen. Are you kidding me? Yeah.
I mean, a little bit. But when you finally saw it, you were like, I thought it would have looked better just hearing it.
I just thought I wasn't that disappointed that I didn't actually see it and I was able to listen to it. Through my little headphone, earphone. It was one.
Yes, mono earphone, probably a little transistor solid state radio.
That's right.
Yep.
And, what's odd is that they look surprisingly like the earbuds of today.
They do, but mixed with a weird old hearing aid.
Oh, yeah, exactly. It does look like Grandpa's hearing aid.
It looks like the iPod hearing aid.
You got it.
Go there.
You got it.
But
yes.
were you growing up prior to that, were you a fan of sort of science fiction and space? I mean, that sort of fever was everywhere for everyone at the time. But
I was nuts for space exploration ever since, because they showed it on TV. They always showed it. And since the time of the Mercury program, because, that's when I was a little kid. Mm-hmm. And no, I didn't go for cowboys and Indians. I went for astronauts.
Yeah.
And I just
Video.
thought it was the coolest thing in the world. And I learned eventually in junior high school that I would not be able to become an astronaut. My guidance counselor or the guidance counselor said, well, number one, you suck at math. And number two, you're colorblind. So you might as well find another thing to do with your life because this is never going to happen.
Oh, man. When I was a kid, we had a NASA scientist come to school and they brought a spacesuit so someone could try it on. And I got picked to put it on because I was tall.
Nice.
And it was one apparently that actually went into space. And I got in trouble because, and I wasn't trying to be funny, was my first thought. I said, did somebody pee in this? And then he said, well, yes, they did.
Sure they did, yeah.
And then I was like, oh, boy. But I was concerned about that. It's funny because I don't think people who weren't alive when this happened or weren't old enough to be aware at all, I don't think they really grasp how enormous this was. And it's funny when I watch sci-fi movies that are pre-1969 and then post-1969, where it's all like, theory. Oh, no, but we're trying to be a little more realistic all of a sudden.
And then suddenly hard science fiction sorts of movies come out like Marooned.
Right. And then everyone's like, wow, that's actually pretty boring. I'd like to go back.
It's 2.5 hours long and nothing happens.
Yeah. I think we need Queen of Outer Space back at this point because we went to the moon and realized there was no space Zsa Zsa Gabor, and now we're all disappointed.
No spiders in moon caves. No, damn it.
No, that's Venus, and we haven't got there yet.
But it was also, Apollo was, the whole thing, especially when it came to the 60s, the late 60s, it was a huge distraction of what was probably the most recent era similar to the one we're in now. Instead of having a plague, we had an all-consuming war going on, a very pointless war, and a war but also an event that was dividing the country in a very serious way. And also, I think every major city, even into 69, actually I know it for sure, and into 1970, they were having riots going on and off.
Oh, absolutely.
In every major metropolitan area in the country, and it snaps me back when I see things now, or when I looked at this TV guide, which none of the news programs actually headlined anything that was going on there, but it was a subject of, especially during the summer, of every network news show.
Yeah, you had, and I always talk about how Vietnam was unique in that it was the first televised war. So it was daily on the news. They were showing grim footage. I mean, we're talking, people, dead bodies, and nothing sanitized like the World War II newsreels that they had been able to put out before that. And so people were seeing this every night on TV.
Right. And I think it was CBS News that started doing the casualty count every night. Which was very sobering.
It's insane, and for people of my generation who, although we've had wars, have had nothing like that. I think that's hard to understand sort of what that atmosphere was like. And you obviously had RFK's assassination not too soon before this. You had Martin Luther King's assassination, and so you have all these things. One of the things I always recommend: have you seen The Night James Brown Saved Boston?
No, I'd love to see that.
It's a great documentary about James Brown was supposed to play the Boston Garden the night that Martin Luther King was shot. And they decided that what they were going to do was scramble and broadcast it live on our PBS station to keep everyone inside. But it's an insane story, and there's a great documentary about it. But in my view, obviously biased because it's Boston, but that paints a very accurate picture of the sort of tension at the time via a very specific, weird sort of pop cultural moment.
Yeah.
And when we look at the shows on this week, it really hasn't trickled down yet to popular culture.
Not really. No, everything still seems to be, everything's fine. Don't pay no attention to the fires behind the buildings.
Right.
Everything's just fine. Yeah.
We're talking laughing, we're talking that kind of thing. And it's interesting because I haven't, someone smarter than me should do this, which isn't difficult to do, but sort of kind of map out when in the 70s sort of the popular culture started to turn would be kind of interesting, I think, to see. Because it definitely did at some point.
Well, when my dad was a bellwether, because he was a Goldwater conservative.
Okay.
Republican. When he started, feathering his hair and wearing sideburns. That's when I knew something in the culture had trickled into the mainstream.
When your dad's like, that David Cassidy, he's all right.
Not quite there. Tom Jones, maybe. Yeah.
The other day, I was really bored, and I decided that to annoy people on Twitter, I was going to pretend that I didn't know that Tommy Lee Jones and Tom Jones were different people.
That will annoy a lot of people.
And you would think most people would immediately recognize that surely nobody would confuse those two. But there were people who were like, no, it's different. So, these are the things we do in lockdown. So there's a huge article in here about the moon landing, obviously. It's on the cover. It's sort of the Super Bowl of this year. And one of the things that struck me was they speak of it as nothing will go wrong.
Oh, yeah.
And obviously nothing did this time, but I also am cynical because I, live in school, saw the Challenger explode
when
I was 5-6 years old. So, it's crazy to see this level of without any hedging.
The freaky thing is, the first casualty in the space program had happened just 2.5 years before.
Yeah.
When Apollo 1 burnt up, so you'd think that, I think it was the kind of thing that it was just a time when the media had a pact to allow these things to happen. And so, and there were, the anchors like Walter Cronkite who were just so trying to be, use this as an opportunity for optimism at a time when he was reporting, really, he was getting pretty down on the war by this time. And this was a great distraction for him, and I think he knew that maybe this is going to be good for the country to have something to look up for and to use nothing but optimism going into this.
I mean, that makes perfect sense, but it's terrible that sounds completely crazy to me.
It's propagandist as hell. Yeah. Absolutely.
It's not like you would think that, if it bleeds, it leads would kind of be the rule of the day, and a little bit like, we must not forget what happened 2 years ago, and although we have taken every precaution, but instead they have like Arthur Clarke is in here writing, they've interviewed and they've interviewed all these sort of visionaries and futurists, and it's kind of actually a really great snapshot of an article, if not somewhat propagandist. And before we get into the actual listings, it struck me as amusing that immediately after this sort of Go America, we're going to the moon, before we get into the programs, here's an ad that says, if you're too old to have diaper rash, it must be something else.
Yes, I saw it. It's very interesting. Maybe it's because this particular issue is from Iowa or Nebraska?
Nebraska, Lincoln, Nebraska, yeah.
People had a lot of jock itch and a lot of hemorrhoids. And it goes to say, if you're sitting on a tractor all day, you're going to get hemorrhoids.
Yeah, there's going to be some groin issues.
And if you're working with corn, pants are going to get full of corn pollen, and you're going to get jock itch.
Yep, we call that popcorn balls. That's what it's called. But from now on, I'm going to have to incorporate that phrase into my day-to-day and be like, you know what they say? If you're too old to have diaper rash, it must be something else. Like some sort of weird folksy saying.
It's like Mark Twain used to say.
Yep. I believe my grandmother had stitches on a pillow somewhere. I mean, good advice. I mean, really, it is kind of an interesting, fortune for us to look at. But let's go into the Saturday night. So obviously, you probably pick the Apollo. I'm assuming.
Well, yeah. I mean, if I was going to watch anything, first of all, during the day and the week, during the summer, I never watched television.
Okay,
daytime television was just gone. But there's a few if it hadn't been for the Apollo, I actually liked Jackie Gleason.
Yeah,
and Jackie Gleason was on that night, and he had George Jessel and Sid Caesar and Myron Cohen.
Yes, and George Jessel, for people who don't know, it was he had a mustache like this.
That's the interesting way of talking. Yes,
he was Billy West's inspiration for Dr. Zoidberg.
Oh, that makes sense.
Real, was George Jessel. Sid Caesar, who I met when I was 2. But I loved the Jackie Gleason variety show, and it's weird how Jackie Gleason, I've heard a lot of bad stuff about. Nothing like we hear about now, but just like he was kind of an unpleasant guy and stole things and whatever. But I can't help but love him. I don't know.
The way he presented himself, first of all, he was not a small man. I mean, he was not a slender man.
Right.
But he didn't seem to care, you know, and he's one of those guys who would just simply smoke all the time on television. And I love the fact that he'd come out at the end of the show with a cup of coffee and a cigarette in his hand and then say goodnight to everybody.
Yeah.
Very strange.
He's like, I'm clocking off.
Very strange little affectation.
I wonder if he too was like, you putting my show on against the Apollo?
Yeah, exactly. I couldn't even play the Apollo.
What the hell?
I'm up against the Apollo. So let's see, like 7 o'clock. Okay, getting into this. First of all, Hogan's Heroes, never funny.
No.
Okay.
Awful.
Get Smart, occasionally funny.
Yeah, that show has a better reputation than it not that it deserves, but than in practice.
Yeah, I mean, at least occasionally. I don't know. I mean, because I think Buck Henry was cutting his teeth when he was doing that show, and Mel Brooks, I think he put his name on it and would come in every now and again to do a gag, and I think you could tell when those two were working on a gag because you'd suddenly see this run-on joke. They would go on for the entire segment between commercials, just some really dumb joke that they insisted on dragging out, either a slow burn or some shtick that would go all the way through it. Like the cone of silence thing was probably their best running gag because it never worked and it took the whole segment and they accomplished nothing. That kind of thing I enjoyed.
Yeah, but it was, people remember those and they don't remember the low points, I think, which is, again, for TV, which we really have only changed recently, the sort of writing shows by committee and pumping out 24 episodes a season, it's sort of a recipe for mediocrity.
Yeah, it's true.
It's hard to do anything different than that.
It's true.
Before you go any further, too, I want to mention, to your point, there is an ad for Sioux Falls, Iowa's ABC affiliate, and it actually is called KORN TV.
Yep, Corn.
Corn TV.
That's right.
Wow, I wonder if they had to buy that off somebody, like someone already
I don't know.
had it.
But Minnesota has a Corn AM station, so we're fortunate to have that.
Is it themed in any way? Or is it just talk radio?
I never listened, so I don't. I'm guessing that it's talk radio.
So it's not corn themed radio, because
no. Although still not averse to having a farm report in the morning. I imagine in the rural parts of Minnesota.
I imagine there's some people who tune in who are like, "I am here for corn-ography, and I did not get any of this." So
hardcore corn.
Yes, the new show on Discovery about a generational corn farmer reality.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. You have, it's sort of a mediocre night, but I can forgive them because, what are you going to do?
Well, Saturday night, people were out.
Yeah.
So they were out at the movies. So they were, if anything, they were competing against them for the movies. I will say that when I found the Johnny Cash show, it was not what I expected. I expected the stodgy, corny guy, but he always had these kick-ass guests on the show.
Yeah.
And it was this particular week, he didn't really have great guests as far as I'm concerned, except Roy Clark, who's an astonishing. And he had Joni Mitchell on. So what the hell? This is worth seeing.
In the Monkees in 1969, we're talking head monkeys. We're not talking
head monkeys. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's pretty. It's not subversive, but for 1969, I mean, this is pretty cutting edge.
Yeah, Johnny sings Long Black Veil with Joni Mitchell, and I would pay money to find a video of that.
Yeah, I'm going to check on YouTube after we're done, because I've been surprised. It sounds like you spent a long time trying to hunt down footage of shows in the pre-internet days.
Well, certain things pop out. Ever since we used to distribute our stuff with Shout Factory and before that Rhino, and I forget one of the two got us all of us a copy of the T.A.M.I show. You've heard of the famous T.A.M.I show?
Oh yeah, it was directed by Steve Binder, who I've had on the show.
That's right. Yeah, and this was like, it's that sort of music on television that I love to look back at, because there's some astonishing performances that are either on Kinescope or the early one, the Telecine, that are still lost. One of the weirdest things for me is this Ernest Tubb show, which had the best of Nashville at the time. And it was done on 35 millimeter film. And it's gorgeous to watch. But it's Ernest Tubb.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's really corny, but it's beautiful, and there's some great performances on there. So those are the kind of archival music performances I like to go back and take a look at.
Because you worked in TV pre-MST3K, right? Did you work in production? And
I was a production dude for the PBS station in Wisconsin, WHA, where I started as an intern and then became sort of a crew member. And that was my apprenticeship. That was where I learned sort of like every single aspect of television production in the studio and remotely. So when I moved to Minneapolis, I knew how to hang a lighting grid and also run a camera and location sound and do mixing and run a switcher board. It really was an amazing experience to work at that TV station because it was built to teach people through sort of an apprenticeship program. And I wish that existed still because I learned nothing about television in college.
No, I didn't either. And I went for TV production, and everything I learned was, working at my local cable access station.
Right. Yeah,
and which was kind of the beauty of those. But I imagine you, like me, one of the first people you befriended in the studio was the archive manager. That's who I am.
Yes. Tom Wisniewski was his name in Madison. He was a great guy, and he was just a total TV nerd. And, of course, he had access to the whole PBS library. And at the time, Wisconsin had been given a couple of movie studios back catalogs. So they were archiving them. We also had a pretty decent film history department. Dean Bordwell was the film history professor.
Oh, who wrote the semiotics book, I think, right? Yeah.
And so it was a great place to go to graduate school and learn a marginal amount about television and then actually go back and work there like my 2 years before the mast and actually learn how television works.
Right. So that you could then unlearn by doing
That's
everything
right.
they did the way they didn't teach you. But
Yes.
It was like a constant barrage when I worked at WBZ, which is our CBS affiliate, being like, hey, do you have the Mission of Burma final show from 1983 that you guys filmed? They were like, yeah, I'll get that for you. So
one of the things I was going to bring up is that two of my favorite shows had already been canceled by this time. One was Star Trek.
Yes.
By 1969. And the other was the Smothers Brothers show.
Yes. They flew too close to the sun.
Which, my dad loved the Smothers Brothers. So he'd tune into that show and then he'd get pissed off. And then he'd turn it off. Said, what is that kind of crap doing on the television?
Would he come back, or was it like that every week?
Well, I think, it was kind of like, they said that they were going to behave themselves a little bit better, and of course, then they didn't, and eventually they just simply got pulled. I mean, it was like an overnight they got the plug pulled on the show.
Yeah, and they got replaced with the Glenn Campbell Hour.
That's right, which was not so bad. Actually.
No, I mean, I like some of Glenn Campbell stuff, but definitely you're not going to risk Glenn Campbell, having Pete Seeger on playing the Big Muddy.
True. But the through thread for me in there was Mason Williams. Now, Mason Williams wrote a book that was part of my inspiration for going. I got a crap undergraduate degree, and then someone gave me a copy of the Mason Williams FCC report, which you should find if you can, because he was asked by the FCC to submit a report on the state of television because he'd worked on 3 or 4 of the most popular musical variety comedy shows at the time, and he just kept a journal, a handwritten journal, over the course of like a year and then handed it in. And it's revelatory, and you see how a mind at the time was trying to change the way that television works, how it thought. And it's a paperback, a big format paperback book, and it's worth looking up. But Mason Williams ended up being one of my countercultural TV heroes.
And then weirdly, I think he had like a top 10 guitar hit.
Classical Gas,
yes,
man.
Yeah, which was really weird. I wonder if like a FOIA request, you could get a copy of that if it's an FCC document. You could probably...
I think you could.
Your taxpayer dollars, you could get
But
that.
he also published it and made a little coin off of it.
Oh, nice.
Not much, but yeah.
He's not with us anymore. Is Mason Williams still around?
I wish I had the Deadpool open in front of me, but I don't.
Yeah,
I think he might be.
I'm trying to figure out if I should throw him some coin and buy a copy that somehow helps him, or stick it to the government. That is a fascinating era, because we're really transitioning into the 70s where we're shaking off the vestigial showbiz pieces of radio. I think, is when this is sort of dissolving at this point. And
it's no longer vaudeville.
Yes. Even though variety shows are still on and they're still king for another decade, they were a different sort of variety show. And we were seeing some new stars rise up that weren't super old men who made their bones, in the 50s.
Yes. We will get to that when we talk about Dean Martin and the Golddiggers.
Yes, absolutely.
One more thing about Saturday. I definitely, if I was able to stay up because my parents are out, I would have watched The Outer Limits at 11 o'clock.
Yep.
And this is just an out of the blue. I found this just today when I was scanning this again. At 2:15 in the morning, a movie that was very popular on Mystery Science Theater played, The Day the Earth Froze.
Yes.
A Russian-Finnish color co-production about the Finnish myth of the Sampo, the machine that made gold and nectar and grain and everything you needed.
This is the Lemminkainen one? Is that the...
This is the Lemminkainen one, exactly.
Yes. But a bizarre and probably only played in this market. You would have these bizarre packages of movies that studios had acquired that would have maybe one movie out of 40 that they actually wanted, but they'd be like, you got to buy all of them.
Exactly. And so that's why they put it on at 2:15 in the morning.
I am also drawn by the episode of Outer Limits that is on is a great one. It's The Invisible Enemy, which is about astronauts going to Mars. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious if anyone was, and Ted Knight is in it, which I forgot. But if people are...
Ted Knight and Adam West.
Oh, that's right. Adam West is in this as well. I'm wondering, aside from, well, no one really knew who Ted Knight was at that time, but Adam West would be recognizable. I'm wondering if anyone tuned in to watch the moon landing and then thought they were watching it. Watching The Invisible Enemy instead.
Wow.
Like, Adam West is in Apollo 11? Man.
Oh.
Because of all the nights, of all the episodes of Outer Limits.
I know.
Someone did that on purpose. They had to.
Yeah.
There's no way. You passed up Miss Universe, I see.
Yeah, that's... that just... No, it never struck me. I mean, sure, bikinis, because I was 12 years old, so bikinis are cool, but the rest of it would be kind of hard to get through.
I wonder if that was the lowest rated Miss Universe contest ever.
Could have been.
Why would you throw that at the moon landing? Like, you're going to lose. It's not going to happen.
Well, they had to put something on, I guess.
That's true. And the something they put on was bikinis.
That's right.
Sunday, what'd you do?
Sunday was hard again because Sunday I truly would have been, if I had been home, I would have been watching the moon landing.
Right.
And Sunday is one of those nights with a lot of the blockbuster shows. Mission Impossible I definitely would have watched, especially it was the older Mission Impossibles with Peter Graves and Martin Landau and Greg Morris and Peter Lupus and Barbara Bain. And so, yeah, I was a fan of Mission Impossible. I thought it was very cool.
Do you have siblings?
Yes, I'm the fifth of six.
Oh, wow. So you probably had zero say in what you were watching.
Zero say, yes. Usually on Sunday nights, my older siblings were busy doing something else. Bonanza, I think we gave up on that ages before. I think my dad sometimes liked Bonanza, but I think he would have preferred the FBI.
Right.
And of course, Ed Sullivan was almost like obligatory viewing.
Yeah.
On Sunday night.
You got to watch it. And Rodney Dangerfield's in this episode, along with Blood, Sweat, and Tears.
Isn't it? That's right. Smiling faces, going places.
This would have been early Dangerfield, too. This would have been right when he started his sort of second phase post-prison.
He was very skinny and very twitchy.
Yes. And then he became very corpulent and twitchy.
That's right.
Sweaty for different reasons. But yeah, this seems like a family night of TV. And by that, I don't mean like family friendly. I mean something for everyone.
Right.
Like the whole family's going to like the FBI.
That's right.
Was there any show that was Kevin gets to watch this every week, even though...
No, really not. The one thing that I laid claim to was on Friday nights we had Creature Features. Right. And we had a show called, there's now a famous celebrity in Chicago named Sven Gulli, who you probably have heard of. Mm-hmm. He had a predecessor. The guy who's presently Sven Gulli was known as son of Sven Gulli for a long time. His predecessor was an old radio jock named Jerry G. Lewis, who just put on like this silver black quote-unquote hippie wig and a headband and a
Yep.
pair of aviator glasses and did a really bad Dracula impression and just gagged it up the whole night. I'm sure the whole crew was stoned to the gills.
Yes.
And they just show really cheesy, again, they showed the library that WFLD, the UHF station, had at the time, which was not good.
Right.
But that was on Saturday nights, I think. But on Friday nights, WGN, that
Superstation.
now the first superstation, I believe, had a great library. They had all the Universals. Mm-hmm.
So they had the Shock Theater package, probably.
They had the Shock Theater package, and they also had Hammer films.
Oh, that's actually unusual.
Yeah, their creature features block was excellent. I think they'd run 2 in a row on Friday night. So if the babysitter fell asleep, I could stay up until 2 at night watching creature features, which is fantastic.
And catching a Hammer film on that, you probably felt like you saw the other side of the moon on that thing.
It was, the thing about the Hammer films was the quality of the photography and the color print. Mm-hmm. And the transfers were pretty good, I think, at the time. And this was, this is still, honest to God, the early days of color, and you had to make sure you had a good antenna.
Right.
Otherwise, nothing looked good. But still, the way that the lighting and the set design and the photography was designed to really bring out the color in all of these things, a lot more than any of the Hollywood horror films were done at the time. It seemed like that was really important to the Hammer production people. It
set them apart. It's funny, when I worked at Turner in the UK in Soho, we were maybe a block away from Hammer House. Mm-hmm. And it's not, obviously Hammer isn't based out of it anymore and wasn't 20 years ago when I worked there. It's like, there's like a Costa Coffee in the basement, but it still says Hammer House. And it's a big building that says Hammer House. And you're like, wow, that's Hammer House. Which is, it's crazy that it's a real thing.
It is. It's amazing that it's still there, and this is a complete aside. But the S&A building, which was one of the first movie studios in Chicago, for a long time afterwards, still had S&A building on the side. I mean, 75 years after it had actually been a movie studio.
That's amazing. It's and that's the kind of stuff that people like us, and I apologize for lumping you in with me, are the kind of people who are like, this is so cool, and everyone else is like, what's that old crap?
Exactly.
Weird. And at this time, when they were showing the Hammer movies, I was shocked to find out that, up until the 80s, some UHF stations were still doing this. They would literally project a 16 millimeter film and just point a camera at the projector.
Wow.
And I'm like, it made sense.
Sure.
Because you don't have video, but that's crazy.
It is crazy.
It's really weird. It's really weird. I worked at WSBK for a while, which was our superstation here. Mm-hmm. And they had in-house editors, like full film editors.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So you could potentially have a movie that would have totally different edits for television, depending on what market you were in.
Oh, and I think they did all the time. I'm certain that WGN did, because they had standards and practices. So these Hammer films come in, and there's probably a lot of that stuff that got snipped out of their copies of the Hammer films. And knowing the way the TV stations worked at the time, they'd send those reels back to whoever the distributor was, without replacing the edits they had made.
Right. Well, I'm sure the things they took out, like Heaving Bosom, some editor took home a couple of pieces of film.
Did their own Cinema Paradiso show there.
Yeah, just do tape together a highlights reel.
Only with boobs, yes.
Yes. Heaving Bosom highlight reel.
That's right.
Anything else on Saturday? I mean, Sunday, rather?
Sunday. Well, the only thing is the ad that's on the page opposite the 10 o'clock block is the
Silva
I think
Thin.
I think this is how my dad saw himself. Okay, with the mock turtle and the racer glass, the Bond sort of glasses, and the blow-combed hair,
and a woman's soul inside him.
And a woman's soul harbored at the base of his skull near his amygdala. But my dad smoked these things for a while.
Oh, this actual brand.
This actual brand, I think he would get sucked in by the advertising, and I think he'd see this guy and say, yeah, I want to look like that. I'm going to smoke Silva Thins for a while.
The lowest in tar of all 100s, lower than most kings, yet better taste. Silva Thin, the one that's in.
It's funny. I swear if you do a blind taste comparison between cigarettes, there are maybe 11 people on the planet who could have told the difference.
Yeah, and then they wouldn't notice after the third cigarette when their taste buds had totally died.
Right.
Yeah, this guy's looking like Scott Walker or something. Not the governor, the musician.
Right.
He's all like, wraparound shades, the turtleneck. Yeah,
Yep.
I mean, he's living the life. He's like a day job beatnik. Like in the Mad Men, like 9 to 5, I have a briefcase. At 6 o'clock, I get the bongos out.
There was one other thing I noticed on Sunday, and then I'll just move on at 10:30 at night. And this is not something that I would have watched at the time, but The Left Hand of God.
Oh, yeah.
A very unusual Bogart film was on at the time, and Agnes Moorehead and Lee J. Cobb and Gene Tierney and
E.G. Marshall.
Yeah,
Yeah, I've never seen this movie.
yeah. It's a wartime movie. Well, actually, I think it's just post-war.
It takes place in 1947, although it's from 1955. Yeah, it takes place in China, a remote province.
I know I've seen bits and pieces of this, but it looks fascinating to me. Bogart is a spy, I think, posing as a priest. I think that's what it was.
Oh, just like in Codename Diamond Head.
I guess. Wow.
An unofficial remake of The Left Hand of God.
Holy cats. I guess, wow, I never thought about that, but you're right, damn it.
Our biggest influence, probably The Left Hand of God. People just thought they were religious, but really they're talking about this movie.
That's right.
Oh man, yeah. There's some good weird movies on that night.
There are some. I wanted to bring that up because Monday night's just a fucking doghouse.
It generally was. That was always the saddest night because you're the furthest away from the weekend. You've like had to go to school or work, and your soul's just crushed.
That's right. Yep. So McHale's and Davy it always just sucked. It wasn't funny. It just wasn't funny. I mean, we'd watch it because it was on. Yeah, and that was about it. And that was about it. But this night, Tarus Bolba was on the 7:30 movie. I would have tuned into Tarus Bolba. That was a fun movie. I remember that one.
Tony Curtis, Yul Brynner.
That's right.
This is they call it, and I've heard Blood and Sand, but this they call a Blood and Thunder spectacle, loosely based on Nikolai Gogol's classic novel in the 16th century Cossack chieftain Tartus.
I think they made that one up. It's not like Sword and Sandal. Blood and Thunder.
Blood and Thunder.
Yeah. That was one of those, like El Cid. Loved El Cid as well. These big spectacular hero movies. I was a sucker for.
Blood and Thunder, the classic Bruce Springsteen bootleg.
Also a reason for you to need Preparation H.
That's true. Yes. That's actually just one of the ads just says Blood and Thunder, Preparation H. No other content on that ad at all. One fascinating thing here. So this is written by Nikolai Gogol, who was one of the only famous Russian novelists in the U.S. at least. Yeah. And he's sort of like the Russian Edgar Allan Poe in a lot of ways. And there's a Russian show they made about Gogol, a fictional show last year, and it's on Amazon Prime, and it's unbelievably good. It basically combines him with his novels, so he's like hunting witches.
Oh, wow.
In 16th century Russia.
Wow.
And it's got this, it's a little bit like Tim Burton's Sleepy Hollow, but sort of very Russian, and it relies heavily on his story of the V, which I think was remade somewhat recently about the witch, and it's one of the best shows I've watched in the last 5 years. It's huge budget, really well made. It's funny, and it's also scary, and it's just really cool, and he's just a cool, weird character.
Yeah. That sounds like fun because shows that I've seen that have sort of made Conan Doyle into a character who gets into his own sorts of adventures, they're hit and miss. Yeah. So it would be nice to see someone like Gogol stuffed into his own weird universe, like doing something like injecting H.P. Lovecraft into his own narratives would be a fascinating exercise.
They did do that in the movie Necronomicon, and Jeffrey Combs played Lovecraft.
Oh, wow.
And it's a weird movie. It's an anthology movie that Brian Yuzna did, who made Reanimator and From Beyond, another Chicago guy. And he, it's weird because they adapt Cool Air and I think the Shadow over Innsmouth, maybe. But then the third story is just is not adapted from a specific Lovecraft movie, but is weirdly Lovecraft story, but is weirdly the most true to Lovecraft.
Interesting.
Which is very, very strange. It's a cool little movie. But yeah, that, to your point, that almost never works.
Yeah. And I'll point out one other thing about Monday, and then we can dump it. And that is that this was the era of Mayberry after Barney Fife had moved out of Mayberry.
Yes.
And Don Knotts was gone. And when it was just all about Howard fucking Sprague. I'm sorry.
Yeah. And
I couldn't keep on with it after then.
I'm sure Ken Barry is a perfectly nice man. However,
Sure
he is in Mama's Family, which is my least favorite show of all time. And Mayberry, which is the stepdad of shows, where it's like, you're not my real show.
Yeah, exactly.
He's like, but I love your mom, and I'm here. But he's like, I don't care.
Go away.
You're not him.
I don't care about Howard Sprague's girlfriend.
Yeah, Don Knotts had moved on to an illustrious film career pre Three's Company by this point. I think 69 is when The Love God came out, which is one of my favorite comedies of all time.
Yeah.
That's a real clunker of a night. I would have gone with that movie as well. Joey Bishop show. Oh, no thanks. Okay, Tuesday, what'd you do?
Tuesday. Well, it was at a time when the Cubs kind of sucked, so I wasn't really into baseball, but I might have tuned into the All-Star game. It was the All-Star game, I think, was that night.
Oh, right, because we're in July, so of course, yeah.
Yeah. And I think one of my older brothers and sisters would have commandeered the TV to watch the Mod Squad.
A show you didn't like?
So I didn't connect with it, you know.
Yeah.
It was a little too melodramatic for me. It was really sort of like a cop soap opera.
That's true.
It was a precursor to like Hill Street Blues.
But
that's what it felt like to me.
Ooh, that Peggy Lipton.
Yeah, she was cute.
Yeah.
She was a looker, that's for sure.
That's true. She had the looks. This is pre-primetime, but just I'm scrolling, I noticed who was in Hollywood Squares that day. And the guests are Jack Albertson, who people know as the grandfather from Willy Wonka, but is from Revere, Mass, and has a wonderful old man Boston accent. Nanette Fabre, Gail Fisher, Michael Landon, Jan Murray, Wally Cox, Paul Lynde, Rosemarie, and Charlie Weaver.
Wow, good old Charlie Weaver.
What a weird collection of people.
Was Paul Lynde center square at this point? Probably.
I don't know if he'd earned his spot to center yet.
Yeah, maybe not.
I feel like he hadn't gone into his full majesty of the 70s as the center square. Because he had when was Bye Bye Birdie? 1964?
Yeah.
So he wasn't too well established at this point. I think he was just still on Bewitched.
He was actually in this edition of TV Guide. There's an article, a profile of him, and it's like the guy who you know but don't know his name.
That's right. Yes, it's at the end there. So where are we there? So you're watching that. Now you're being forced to watch Mod Squad against your will.
Yeah, I might have watched It Takes a Thief. I thought that was a fun show when it was on. And NYPD, that's what my dad would have tuned into, and I would have watched it with him because it was a gritty cop show. It was more I guess you'd call it. Yeah, it was a little tough.
Yeah, this was not NYPD Blue. This is just plain NYPD. And this show is not sort of remembered very much. I think it was only one season. Didn't really re-air. Yeah,
Jack Warden and Frank Converse, and they were good. You know, it was a lot more. There was actually a lot more like a model for later cop shows that came along, and
which is probably why it didn't get into syndication that much, because I think at that point people still wanted like cool LA cop shows, or sort of Dragnet set the standard. So anything that wasn't like Dragnet, people were like, I don't understand what this is.
Yeah. So one of the things I will a takeaway for everyone is that whoever were fans of Police Squad, where they show the the lights going through the street and then like through a cafeteria and going all over the place. The beginning of NYPD was that that car top light set on a police car, showing that that was their opening scene. So I know that the Zuckers took it from there.
The supporting cast in this episode is amazing. You have William Macy, aka Bill Macy from Maude, who's also from Revere, Mass, and was one of Jack Albertson's best friends.
And William Hickey's on
William
this
Hickey
one, too.
got quite a voice. William
right.
Hickey, who was always 71 years old. Were you a fan of Tales from the Crypt, the HBO Tales from the Crypt?
It was on during a time when I didn't even own a TV, and cable was, I wouldn't have been able to afford it at the time. I was dead broke, so I never really got into it.
There's an episode directed by Arnold Schwarzenegger that stars William Hickey.
That's just bizarre.
And it's a pretty good episode, but the thing I love most about it is imagining the directorial conversations of Schwarzenegger directing William Hickey. What?
See, I'm sorry, I can't understand what you're saying. You're just going to have to slow down.
Wait, let's do it again from the top.
What? I'm not catching that. I don't know what you want. I don't know.
There's the buddy cop show we were robbed of.
Better than Billy Crystal, yeah.
That's true. That would have been great. Where are we on Wednesday? Weirdly, I did notice too, 60 Minutes for some reason is on Tuesday night.
That's bizarre. Wow.
But it's a special, so it must have.
Yeah, it does say special. They moved it because of the moon landing.
Yeah. The only thing that can move 60 Minutes is literally the moon.
Yeah. There's a tour of the Duke and Duchess of Windsor's summer home outside Paris.
That just sounds enraging.
Who cares?
Yeah. We got a right-wing multi-billionaire. H.L. Hunt discusses taxes.
Yeah.
H.L. Hunt sounds like the most made-up, lazy sketch comedy name for like a Texas billionaire. Ha-ha, say I'm a H.L. Hunt.
Well, I remember the days of Bunky Hunt making it into the headlines a lot.
Wow.
Yeah.
Geez. So where are we?
Okay, Tuesday. I think we can shuffle off to Wednesday here. I think, yeah.
Okay. You're not watching Revenge of the Black Eagle or...
No, not watching David Susskind. It's just too.
Yeah.
The Name of the Game I always found pretty dull, corny, sort of an anthology show.
Is there any shows from this era that you go back and revisit now?
That's a good question. I've gone back and watched some of the Johnny Cash shows, just because they tend to be so good. Yeah, and surprisingly good. Pretty timeless as well, because he's not. I think with few exceptions, there's not we're doing a disco version of Men in Black. They didn't do like the other shows would do. No, they didn't. He'd do traditional stuff, and he had every single folk rock star of the time came on there at one time or another. Yeah, and got to do their own music instead of doing a medley. Yes. The medley was always the most disappointing thing. If it was an artist you liked and you tuned in for that show and you're like, what's happening? Yeah, that's why I was looking ahead to Kraft Music Hall has Kay Ballard and Terry Thomas and Judy Carn, and they're doing a medley of Beatles songs, and you can imagine how that sounded. Oh, I can't even. That sounds horrific. What's your favorite, all-time favorite television music program? Oh boy. I used to watch, Don Kirshner's rock concerts. Oh yes, I'm Don Kirshner. Yes. Who he's the guy who Mike Nesmith punched a hole in the wall and said to him, quote, "That should have been your fucking face." And Doug Kirshner goes, Michael wanted to play country and western songs. Right. Didn't happen. No. Boy, the Midnight Special when I was in high school always had something interesting on. Yeah, that show was, when it was great, it's unbelievably great. And the thing that I loved was they would, if the bands wanted to, they didn't always want to, but the band every week was allowed to curate the show. Right. So sometimes you'd get when the Cars curated it, they put Suicide on. Wow. So it was just insane. And then the next week you have 38 Special, but it's just how is this the same show? Crazy. So the one thing in common is that there's this power block of Beverly Hillbillies and Green Acres. Yes. Beverly Hillbillies, not that funny. Green Acres, generally more funny.
I love Green Acres. That's a show. It's so funny and smart.
Yeah.
And subversive and knowing and weird.
Again, they had, their classic gags that they'd keep going back to, but like Mr. Haney, I could do with or without, but Ebb
yes.
is still one of my favorite characters. And I think that Green Acres really sort of perfected that idea of having, besides, Eddie Albert being, the fish out of water.
Right.
But the running gags where he doesn't get something, but everyone keeps repeating to him, that's something he should get. It showed up in Seinfeld all the time.
Yeah, everybody knows that.
Exactly. Yes.
And nobody does just barely contained rage for comedic effect as well as Eddie Albert did.
Oh, yeah. He was perfect for us.
You just got the impression that at any moment he was just going to start throwing haymakers at everybody. And probably would have been totally justified because
absolutely,
he's the most reasonable person on that show.
Well, he's the only reasonable person. And of course, his wife would just buy into everything that the crazy people in town were saying, which was wonderful. Yes.
It's like there were gags on that show. There's the famous opening credits gag where Ava Gabor was aware it was a TV show and was commenting on the credits and like they were written on towels. Like there was a ton of stuff like that. The episode I always cite is the one where Arnold Ziffel, the pig, gets drafted into Vietnam.
Yes.
Which is a thing that actually happened.
Yeah, amazing.
Just like this, and again, in order to even address Vietnam at the time, it had to be a show that was so superficially silly on the surface that nobody was even suspecting they were getting anything through.
But I think that they could be much more anarchistic than the Beverly Hillbillies could, because Beverly Hillbillies came out of this, it had been on for years already. You know, I think one of the shows that made the transition from black and white into color, and Green Acres was, I think, from the beginning, it was sort of like its license to go mad with the same sort of character set.
Yes, and it helped that it was a spin-off of Petticoat Junction, which was less silly.
Yes.
And so they could kind of go nuts. And Beverly Hillbillies, to me, was always about laughing at them.
Yes.
And Green Acres was more everyone. You're just like, what's happening? Like, it was just a totally different humor lever.
Eddie was always the object of the joke.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Everyone was a foil in that show.
Yes. Yeah. I love that show. That's a show I revisit often, and that's a real comfort show for me, where it's just like, I'm always going to laugh. It's the seething rage of Eddie Albert is such a comfort, which says a lot about me.
Yep.
Anything else? Sorry, go ahead.
That's about it. That's about it for Wednesday. Yeah, again, the midweek is sort of a doldrum in a lot of ways. There's no highlights popping out here that I saw.
You passed up Hawaii Five-0.
I did. I wasn't a fan. I maybe should have been. But again, I'm 12 years old. It doesn't thrill me. I'd rather read my, Arthur C. Clarke novels.
Yeah.
Isaac Asimov and do that than watch, it was one of those, oddly enough, for a guy my age, I would rather have read a book than watch TV at the time.
That's not that unusual for, the people I've had on who, when we've talked about this era in the 70s too, that's fairly common. I think it's really the generation after that where people are like, wait a minute, turning off the TV is an option? Because I know so many people who are like, oh yeah, watch that show every week. Never liked it.
Yeah. Or going to your room and reading a book, because at that time, and I'm not trying to sound like when I was your age, but I guess it is because kids didn't have TVs in their rooms unless they were like the really rich kids. At that time, we were living in Wheaton, Illinois, which is a pretty wealthy suburb of Chicago. And we had a pretty fancy house, and my dad had a Cadillac, and my mom had a station wagon. And no, there's no way. There were two televisions in our house. One was in the living room.
Mm-hmm. The good TV?
In the family room.
Yep.
That was the good TV. That was the color TV.
We'd call that the Paula.
And then in my parents' room, they still had their old RCA black and white that they had brought from their old house in River Forest, and that was their TV to watch. So they didn't watch much TV up in their bedroom.
Right. But that was like kind of like, oh, you can go watch that up in our room.
Right. Yes. But and then there was, you didn't want to watch it in black and white and it had a terrible antenna. So just kind of sucked.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The good TV discussions were lost on a generation. Like I always say that there was a skill set that people earned in this era and sort of pre-millennium in that you had to be able to make a case for things you liked. Because you had to share the space. So if there was a show you wanted to watch, you had to sell it to everybody.
You had to have a good reason to do it.
Yeah. So you had to kind of understand that and be like, all right, this show's great. Let me tell you about it. Here's why you want to watch it.
Well, one of my earliest television memories, because I was in second grade when this happened. This was in 1963 when the Beatles were first on Ed Sullivan.
Uh-huh.
And my sister... Ed Sullivan started at 7, I want to say, Central. And she camped out by the television from 5 in the afternoon, making sure that no one touched that goddamn dial until after the Beatles had been on. And she fought everyone off. She can be a very compelling... she was the deputy clerk of courts in the state of Wisconsin at the time when things were really hard-ass there. So she fought tooth and nail against judges, and I could see where she cut her teeth, and that was fending off her brothers from taking over the TV so that she could watch the Beatles.
Because there was nothing a teenage boy wanted to see less probably in 1963 than the Beatles before they had blown up. Like that just sounded like the worst thing ever.
Yeah. Yeah, it probably, the Rolling Stones, it was like a breath of fresh air when they came out and said kids didn't have to, the girls weren't screaming at the Rolling Stones like they were. And the Rolling Stones were playing, a lot more.
It's a little sleazier.
Howlin' Wolf, you know. Yeah.
They had a little more sex going on there. There was some more hip action. The Beatles were a little chaste, oddly, at the time.
Thursday. Yeah, Thursday's interesting to me. First of all, the Munsters was a thing you'd watch when you'd get home from school and you didn't want to have to do your homework, but there was absolutely nothing else on.
Mm-hmm. I'm an Addams Family guy. The Munsters looked good, but was not a great show.
No, the Addams Family was much more subversive, I thought. Yeah, and that was always my go-to as well. But there's a couple of things here that I wanted to point out that I don't think I appreciated either of these shows until long after they aired and until I gave up on television for a long time and then came back to it when I was like out of college. And I was here. I'm actually in graduate school and I'm studying media arts. And I went in through I went through the TV film program, and I'm learning how to direct TV. And I don't own a TV. And my professor said, like, how can you do this without owning a TV? I said, then I'm unsullied by all the bullshit that's on. I can actually, appreciate things. But there's two things that stick out. Dragnet is one of them. I never could tune into it when I was a kid. It just seemed so dry and abrupt. But when you go back and watch it these days, there's something really appealing about the cadence and the way the story was told, and like a direct descendant from hard-boiled sort of noirish cop shows, only cleaned up, antiseptic, so there's very little. If there's sex, it's just, they use terms like smut. Yeah, and the cops are in no way have no failings. Yeah. Like in the detective novel, it was always like, the guy has a drinking problem or he's got demons from the war or something like that. Dragnet was like, nope. Yes. None of that. No. They are definitely, they're as straight and narrow as can possibly be. But the other show that I'd never watched when it was on was The Prisoner. Yes. And until now, I hadn't realized that it was on that early, because then when I was in college, The Prisoner was being shown on the PBS station in Madison. And that was the first time I ever watched it. And I said, what the hell? This is wonderful. Yeah. And this was on like 15 years before. I had no idea. Yeah. And it's funny. There's actually a TV Guide article written by Isaac Asimov about The Prisoner.
that I can send you if you've never seen it.
I'd love to.
And I was talking last week to Alex Cox, who directed Repo Man, which is one of my all-time favorite movies. And he's like, I'm just not a TV guy, man. The only show I like is The Prisoner. And he recently wrote a whole book about The Prisoner because I was like, oh, if you ever, I just happened to have that article. I just recently scanned it. And I said, he was like, oh, I'm well aware of this article. But the thing that surprised me was, for such a bizarre show, it was a huge hit.
It was, surprisingly.
A massive mainstream hit, which is crazy.
It just never showed up on our radar. Now, was it syndicated? Because it was British, right?
So, it was syndicated. It was not ITV, but the ITC, I think they're called.
ITC,
who did The Muppets later. And so it was the same syndication company that had done Secret Agent Man prior to this. Which was the show The Prisoner's kind of a sequel to.
Well, and I loved Secret Agent, as a matter of fact. That show I got into when I was young, but I think The Prisoner somehow flew under my radar. It might have just been because of the time that it was on in Chicago, but it wasn't until long afterwards, and I was in grad school, when I finally started to watch it and thought, this is profound.
Oh, yeah.
This is really fun.
It's funny how it's like a lot of stuff Kubrick would do later. That's in this thing from 1969. And it's again, one of my favorite things, and an amazing man who goes from 0 to incredibly angry in 2 seconds, Patrick McGowan. Like, imagine a show where just Patrick McGowan and Eddie Albert yelling at each other. I never want it to end.
No. Wonderful.
But a show, it's very 60s and very dated, but somehow it completely relevant and fresh no matter when I watch it.
It's the kind of show I think that Neil Gaiman would have written if he was writing television in England in the 60s.
Yeah, easily. Yeah. Have you ever seen the movie The Final Program?
Don't think I have.
It's based on, what's his name, Moorcock, the sci-fi writer. It's 1973. It was, I believe, an Amicus production. And it is real weird. It is like if The Prisoner was mixed with Austin Powers, but not a comedy. And if you like The Prisoner, it's a movie. If you like The Prisoner and you like Hammer movies, especially like Dracula AD 1972, like the swinging 70s ones, it's pretty amazing, and it's just bizarre. And it's a movie that you probably will feel confused by in the good way that you were confused by revisiting The Prisoner.
Oh, sure. Well, wonderful. I will look for that.
Highly recommend it.
Okay, one more thing for Thursday here.
Yes.
The show that my dad would watch. And I don't know how this was like, I think it was a guilty pleasure for him because I don't think he really liked Dean Martin, but the Golddiggers was on.
Yeah.
And I think he just liked looking at the women.
Yeah.
I think that's what it was all about, was these women would come out and they were his chorus, and they'd gather around him in their frilly little mini skirts or their nightgowns at the end of the show.
Yes.
They'd come out, they'd sing, "This is a lovely way to spend the evening. Can't think of anything we'd rather do." And they're gathering around Dean, who by this time just reeks of cigarettes because he never stopped smoking on the show.
No.
And I can't imagine that in any way he was sexy, but, I don't know. So I think my dad sort of, put himself in Dean's shoes and thought, first of all, he would use so many Italian slurs towards the guy. But I won't get into that now, but you can imagine what he said.
My favorite kind of slurs.
Oh, yeah. And a Chicago Irishman, so Chicago Italian.
Oh, yeah. That's Boston, same thing.
Yeah.
I always joke that if aliens landed on Earth, they would contact my uncles to come up with slurs for them. Like the government would be like, "We need new slurs. These aren't even human." And they'd be like, "Oh, we're the best."
And Bostonians are masters of the slur.
It's true.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
yes.
The accent helps too, but it's absolutely. The Golddiggers. So Dean Martin, if Jackie Gleason came out with a cigarette and a cup of coffee at the end, Dean Martin came out with a cigarette and 9 scantily clad women at the end.
Right.
But this particular episode, you got Paul Lynde in it. You got Barbara Stanwyck.
Yep.
Which is-
and Lou Rawls.
Yep, Lou
Tommy
Rawls.
Toon probably did a dance routine.
Yep, and the Les Brown Orchestra. It's
Yep.
again the time capsule nature of some of these things is pretty cool. But Dean Martin was one of those guys I just couldn't. His whole thing, like the whole Rat Pack thing, was so, as like a punk rock kid, was so like just physically repulsive to me.
Oh man, it was hard. But again, I was 12, and here's all these gorgeous ladies.
Yep.
And it gave me an excuse to watch them with my dad. So
Yeah.
I think it was maybe sort of a bizarre bonding experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all had those shows that we watched with our parents, but we were watching our parents watch it to try to decode how to be an adult.
I think so. Yeah.
Like, oh, what do they think is funny? What do they like, and why do they like it? And which is sort of an important thing as a kid, I think, to sort of figure those things out. I
agree.
I just imagine your dad's sort of secret life of Walter Mittying himself into the show while you're watching it in his cigarette turtleneck.
It's sort of true. Like my mom sadly died very young. She was 47 years old, and she died of cancer. And then my dad he foundered for a couple of years, and then he went full on bachelor. Man,
Nice.
Did absolutely
Hi-fi.
Oh yeah, with a reel to reel.
Yep.
And multi-room sound, and he drove a Porsche 911.
Oh man, he's like Mike Hammer.
And he wore jumpsuits,
Oh, amazing.
He bought things out of the American Mail catalog.
Yes.
and puka shells.
Oh
and,
wow.
Yeah, he went the full boat. And leisure suits when they came out.
Your dad's the best. He's like a one-man dating game.
He was 6'4", white hair, blue eyes.
Oh wow.
So yeah, he was a lady killer. And
Man, there's your show.
yeah, I'll send you a picture of him, because every time I send pictures of, everyone says, "Wow, he was gorgeous."
Yeah, man.
Yeah, I don't know what the hell happened to me, but he was gorgeous.
Like, you're fine.
I will point out one more thing about the Golddiggers, just because the obtuse step that they took is that they had this regular stand-up comedian named Stanley Myron Hendelman. Do you remember him?
Yes.
Because he was like a storyteller, right? He very low key, very dry.
Yep.
And he talked like, he was a Jewish kid, and he talked about his mom, and he talked about his family and his neighborhood. And it seemed like so unlike the rest of the Dean Martin show that it always gave me pause. I enjoyed it, but then they'd get back into the Dancing Girls immediately afterwards.
He was sort of the Dean Martin show's non-political Pat Paulson.
Right.
It was like a weird. It was like a sorbet cleanser in the middle of the show.
I think that's
it didn't take too much. But was kind of one of the great things about the people who would program and book these variety shows is that they knew you can't have it up at 10 the whole show.
Right.
Because people are it's not gonna be impressive anymore. Like, you need to kind of have actually put some thought into the way that you program it, which is kind of interesting.
And it would give people a shot who otherwise wouldn't have had a shot.
Absolutely.
Really cool.
Absolutely. Yeah. And to be in front of an audience we couldn't imagine. Like these shows where there's only 4 or 5 channels, I mean, we're talking half the country's watching this show.
Right.
It's not the sort of niche thing we have now. There's also a music show on Thursday evening that I presume is local. It's on Channel 10. And I only mention it because it's called Dick Wickman.
Wow. What time is Dick Wickman on?
Dick Wickman's on at 7:30. Dick Wickman, music. That's all it says. That's all it says.
It's got to be a local then.
Yeah, I'm going to have to do some digging about Dick Wickman, because if your last name's Wickman and your first name is Richard and you go by Dick, you know what you're doing.
You definitely know what you're doing.
Yeah. You don't mess around.
No, you get right to the point.
Yeah, you're like, Dick Wickman, music.
I'm Dick Wickman. Here's my music.
Music's my bag.
Yes. So anything else on Thursday?
Nothing else?
Yeah. Well, The Avengers is on.
I do love The Avengers.
I like The Avengers. It's just that combination of that classy old, and I think it was made to look like he was much older than her, although they were probably about the same age.
Ish, yeah.
Yeah. And he drove that Bentley.
Oh, yeah.
Beautiful Bentley, which was, James Bond's first car was not an Alfa Romeo. It was a Bentley, very much like the one that John Steed. Now, there's a name for you.
John Steed.
Yes.
Welcome to John Steed and Dick Wickman, associates.
He was not very steedy, though, because he was much more like the early James Bond, much more of a tweedy gentleman.
Yes, sort of camp, a little bit camp. I did an episode with Melanie Chardoff, and she was good friends with Patrick McNee later in life. And she said he would travel around the world not spending a dime and stay in these amazing places. And she was always like, Patrick, how do you do this? And he goes, I'll tell you the secret. Have 2 good stories and never stay more than 2 days.
Yes.
And and everyone will invite you everywhere and no one will expect you to pay.
That's brilliant.
And I'm like, he figured it out, man. He knew what he was doing.
I spent this is an entirely different type of the same thing, but I did the comedy or the sci-fi convention circuit for a while there during Mystery Science Theater. And I got to meet Richard Hatch from Battlestar Galactica.
Yep, Richard Hatch, yep.
And he would do every night, he would regale people with a story or 2. And he never bought a meal. He never bought a drink. And I saw him one night, and if he ever hears this, he'll probably hate me because he would hate for anyone to admit this about him. But he did the same routine with 2 different groups of people.
Of course.
So he regaled one group, and then they went away, and then maybe he went and had dinner, and then knew on it. I want to have a nightcap, so I'm going to go down and regale some other people with.
Yeah, it's a barter system. I mean, I've been going to conventions for 35 years, and the last 10 or so since I've been doing the show and doing stand-up, like I get asked to moderate a lot of things, and I do a lot of Q&As and do the bigger cons, and it's funny because the people who've been doing it forever, so these are the people who've been doing these circuits since the 80s, some of them. They're the worst people to moderate or run an interview with because they have stock shtick that they do. And I'm always about trying to get something a little more interesting, or because people, I'm like, for their benefit, I'm like, there's probably a bunch of stuff you want to talk about that no one ever asked you about, or that you really, you're probably sick of talking about this thing. But they're not like, they're just like, no, I have my thing. I can zone out. And I couldn't do that. It's just, you'd get so bored.
Yeah.
It would just.
I can understand that. I've done very few of those moderatings. The 2 that stick out is that I got to do just this year at Sketchfest. Got to do a panel with for the movie Airplane.
Oh yes,
with Jerry Zucker.
Oh yeah, Jerry Zucker. Yep.
And
that's a tough panel. Those are tough guys to rein in.
But they had a couple of shticks, and they were good shticks.
Yeah.
So it was really fun to do, and he helped me do my job, and he was very at ease at doing it. And so, in a way, he didn't want to go way off base, but he was willing to occasionally.
It's an interesting dance that you do as a moderator, where you want to get something interesting, but you also want to. Yeah, I mean that whole world. When I first started doing it, I was just to go on a tangent for a moment. I apologize.
Sure. That's okay.
The first day I did, I used to volunteer because I was like, I've been to so many shows. I've seen so many terrible panels where I feel bad for the audience. I feel bad for the guest because the moderator doesn't know anything. He's just listing things that he thinks he knows and not asking questions. And then just Chris Farley showing the rest of it. Like, it's just like, why is anyone here? So I'm like, I'm going to do the best panels anyone's ever seen, and everyone's going to have a good time. And then I realized that the ones that have a Q&A portion built in, part of that is, and it struck me like years after I'd been doing them, those people don't really want to ask a question. They don't really care about the question. They want a minute to have their voice come out of their mouth and physically go in the ear of the person that they want to talk to, so that they can have a time when they're like, I spoke to that person and they spoke to me, and it's kind of irrelevant about what the topic is.
Right.
And so it hit me that was the case, and I felt really bad, like I had robbed people of that opportunity by being like, we're going to cover all the stuff so they don't have to ask it, and
but they want to. It's you kind of have to get out of the way and be like a listener along with the audience in order for it to work well.
So it's like a really interesting balance to do that, and I kind of love that. It's like a very interesting chess game. Doesn't always go well. There's a few people who just didn't like me.
I got a great lesson in that when I did the panel for Axe Cop.
Okay.
With Ethan Nicole. I don't know if you know him.
Yep.
He's a brilliant cartoonist, and his little brother Malachi, excuse me, who was at the time 6.
Yeah.
And I sort of had to let him run the panel because he's the star of the thing. He's the guy who comes up with all the ideas, and Ethan just records what they're saying and writes things down and sketches characters and just let the kid ramble. And he was hilarious, and he owned the audience. So it was one where all I had to do was occasionally prompt a question and
keep time,
and let them run. Yep.
That's it.
Keep time. Exactly.
Sometimes that's all you're there for. Then sometimes it's like pulling teeth with the person where you're like, I don't know why you're here. I'm sure you don't want to be here. It's you got to have them come around. But sometimes you end up on stage in front of 5,000 people, and Christopher Lloyd tells you're not funny. I'm just saying that might have happened to me last year.
Honey. Oh man.
Yeah. That was rough. Yeah. Well, it happens. But I did win over Ron Perlman the year before, and that was quite
nice.
That took some doing, but it felt like quite an accomplishment. So Friday night.
Okay. The one thing that jumped out on me, I gotta say, is 8:00 on channel 2 and 12. So we're guessing public station. It's low on the dial. Play of the week, Rashoman.
Yes. Yes.
Directed by Sidney Lumet.
Yes.
Wife Carol Lawrence, bandit Ricardo Montalban.
Yeah.
It's just bizarre. So it's an Americanized version of Rashoman, and I would love to see this sometime.
Yeah, if you got any connections at PBS still, make a phone call.
I do, but there's a good bet that this thing was never it went out live.
Yeah.
Or that maybe there's a Kinney of it someplace, and I'd love to find it because wow.
I mean, the only hope there might be some 16mm prints sitting somewhere like with the old Doctor Who episodes or something that were lost. But this blew my mind as well. I mean, this is crazy. It takes place in Japan though. Which is really weird. So you got just the concept of Ricardo Montalban in Kyoto, Japan, 1,000 years ago. Already I'm in. I don't even care what the story is at that point.
Well, it sounds fascinating. I had forgotten how much TV that Sidney Lumet had directed before he, really dove into movies.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, people were cutting their teeth in this stuff. And this, if anyone's listening and can get a copy of this, usually my listeners are pretty good about being able to dig up stuff that is lost or very difficult to find. Let me know. And if I get a copy, I will certainly share it with you because this sounds pretty fascinating. Yeah, it's I've only ever seen the movie.
Yeah,
it sounds amazing.
And other than that, Friday night this didn't inspire me. Gomer Pyle,
terrible.
I never tapped into that. High Chaparral was an hour and a half Western.
Yeah,
at least with the first couple of seasons, it was 90 minutes long.
Yeah, 90 minutes was a really routine TV slot for a long time.
I guess. Wow.
Weirdly.
Yeah.
The only thing that jumped out at me was, I like The Saint well enough. It's fine. But the Dick Cavett show, at first, not that interesting. Pianist Peter Nero. But here's where I got real interested. Satirist Bob and Ray.
Oh, yeah.
And that's Bob Elliott, Chris Elliott's dad, and Ray, both from Boston, both old radio guys.
That's right. I love Bob and Ray.
Oh, my God. They are so hilarious.
Oh man!
To this day.
Oh yeah,
it's so funny.
Oddly enough, Ken, I think if you scan this, I think you find that they were on Johnny Carson earlier in the week.
Oh, very nice. They must have been promoting something.
I could have been.
Yeah, I'm sure. Oh,
I loved Bob and Ray, and Bob and Ray were kind of role models for me early on because they were just, first of all, they were so deadpan.
Yes.
And they were so light on their feet, and you could tell when they were trying to bust each other up, and quite often were really successful at it. And I think of my favorite podcasts who tend to be like Andy Daly, Super Ego.
Yep.
Anything that's got Paul F. Tompkins, which is like 50 different podcasts. And the ability to be that light on your feet and still be that funny is a gift that I think Bob and Ray had. Which was
and just is born out of trying to make their friend laugh. Really, Like that's the core of it. They were straight news guys.
Yeah.
At one point, and they had a late night show, I believe on WBZ, the radio station here in Boston. And one night they didn't have a guest, so they interviewed each other as fake guests. And that was their whole shtick, and it's amazing. It is 1979 in the SNL spot. They did a Bob and Ray special, and it's Bob, Ray, Lorraine, Gilda, and Jane.
Wow.
And it's the three women from SNL and Bob and Ray, and they're doing their classic stuff, but it seems totally contemporary, and it's funnier than SNL was in 79, I'll tell you that.
Oh, yeah.
But it's an amazing special. It's up, the whole thing's up on YouTube. There's a treasure trove of Bob and Ray stuff that was really hard to see, that people in the last year or so have uploaded on there. And I tell people they don't get name checked very often for comedy, and it's a shame because they're just so funny.
Fantastic.
So
yeah,
funny.
I've got a lot of their, it's one of those, I have a few of the comedy records that we had around our house when I was a kid, and one of those is a Bob and Ray, one's a Bob Newhart, we've got a Shelley Berman.
So very dry stuff, the straight man stuff.
Oh yeah. That stuff always killed me.
Gotta play it straight. Yeah, I love it. Yeah. I'm gonna rewatch that Bob and Ray special tonight, I feel like. And I'm looking.
That sounds like fun.
Highly recommend that as well. That is fantastic to watch in this current state of the world. Yes. But Rodney Dangerfield on Johnny Carson that night.
Yes.
Also making the rounds.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, probably. But I loved it when they just, do their routine to come out. Where are you playing this week? I'll be playing Vegas here. I'll be playing Jersey City here.
And then there's a show called Here Come the Stars.
Oh, yes.
Hosted by George Jessel.
Yeah, I sort of remember this. And I think that was definitely one that was for the older, like the Lawrence Welk crowd.
Yeah, Henny Youngman's on this episode along with Don Rickles.
Yeah.
Which is, okay. Yep, and then we end with the amazing Paul Lynde article.
That's right.
Where he talks about his father owning a butcher shop in Ohio and how he was a fat kid. His words, but he
moved into Errol Flynn's old house in Beverly Hills.
Yes,
when he finally got successful.
I don't know if I'd want to live in Errol Flynn's old house in Beverly Hills.
Well, maybe have it steam cleaned first.
Yeah, or just that would be. But the other fascinating thing here, after that article, there's a thing about how a network schedule was set on a cold day in February. And it's much like that diary that you discussed at the very beginning here with Mason Williams, in that it's this amazing snapshot of one day in February for Sweeps Week, and they literally have that big board with the shows, and they're moving them around, putting them in the slots.
The strip board, yep.
And it's in a time when you didn't get to see how this stuff worked.
Yeah,
it's a pretty cool article to be able to check out.
It is, and it sort of explains a lot of the language that ended up being used to describe television programming that you wouldn't have understood unless you subscribed to Variety magazine at the time. And the idea, this is where I think the term slot came from, was from this board that they'd have. Yep. We're going to put this in this slot, and watching the way they put this together, and the shows, the CBS shows that are up there, are great. And there's Here Come the Brides. It takes the thief. Oh, High 5-0. Marcus Welby, MD, which I'd entirely forgotten about.
Yep. Yeah, wow. It's just a cool little weird sort of documentary snapshot.
It's real inside baseball stuff.
Yeah, I loved looking at that.
It's fun.
Before we wrap up, is there anything that you've been watching in lockdown, or anything that you've enjoyed or you'd recommend?
What I've been doing to keep my sanity is, it's like I said, the summers are so beautiful here in Minnesota that I take advantage of them as much as possible. And I bought a weather-resistant movie screen and a little projector, and we have been having movie nights with a bonfire out in our yard.
What are some of the flicks you've been showing?
Oh, let's see. I had Mike Nelson and Bill Corbett and their families over here one night, and we started with A Bug's Bunny, Heckling Hare.
Nice.
One of my favorites. And again, it's got one of the longest jokes. That's another story. We don't have to get into it, but it's the reason that Bob Clampett left Warner Brothers was because the scene at the end when the dog and Bugs are plummeting, and it goes on forever, and the music's going, and they're screaming, and they're screaming, and they're screaming. Apparently, Bob Clampett had a 3-minute cut of that scene.
Yeah.
They just kept falling, and then they stop, and then they fall again.
It's one of those things that it gets not funny, then funny again, then not funny.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, so the Schlesinger said, no, you are going to cut that. I make the decision here. And they said, you can cut it. I'm leaving the studio. And he never looked back.
Yeah, went and did Beanie and Cecil.
That's right. But so we showed that. We showed Bugs, and then we showed Wallace and Gromit the Wrong Trousers.
Excellent.
And then we had Animal Crackers. And so it was a great night.
When the three of you get together to watch a movie for fun, is it hard to just shut up?
Nope.
Or you're like, we're off the clock?
You have to pick the right movies, you know.
Yeah.
It's definitely not. It's just too much fun, especially a movie like Animal Crackers.
Yeah.
It just, I mean, we end up heckling the movie when it should get heckled, when the silly romance that has nothing to do with anything,
right.
and the caper, which also has nothing to do with, get back to the Marx Brothers, for crying out loud.
Right.
Get these idiots off the screen.
If anyone didn't need padding,
Yeah.
it's them.
But I guess, since these were Broadway shows, they felt like, well, it has to be a certain length, and there's only so much comedy. So they were doing that definitely to allow people to catch their breath.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Like have you ever seen the Hell's a Poppin' movie?
Oh, yes.
Oh, I love it so much. And that is a movie that you don't get to catch your breath in that movie.
No.
It's
and it is
nonstop.
exhausting.
It is. It feels like a really long movie in a good way, but now that I think about it, maybe it could have used some stuff like that, because you got to watch it multiple times to even get everything. It's
true. It's true.
It's just a marathon. Well, thank you so much for doing this. I appreciate it.
Well, this was my pleasure. Thank you, Ken. It was really fun, and now I'm gonna the sun is still high in the sky. I'm gonna head out to our little yard and gonna have a bonfire tonight.
Nice. Make some s'mores and pull up some Bob and Ray on YouTube and watch it on the big screen.
That's a great idea. Excellent.
Cool. There you go. That's Kevin. Weirdly, growing up in Boston, that's the only Kevin Murphy I've ever met. I know a lot of Murphys, but no Kevin Murphys, aside from this Kevin Murphy. I know that's not interesting to anyone but me, but I'll tell you something. It's real interesting to me. Anyway, if you have anything that's interesting to you, please email me at tvguidancecounselor@gmail.com or ken@icanread.com. icanread.com, formerly my stand-up comedy page. I guess technically it still is, but there is no stand-up comedy. I refuse to acknowledge the weird rogue shows that people are doing that's spreading disease and killing everybody, or those odd outdoor shows, which really, in my view, is not stand-up comedy. But that's a whole other rant that I don't have time to go on right now. I want to thank you guys for listening and for giving to the Patreon, patreon.com/TV Guidance Counselor. If you don't give to the Patreon, I also just thank you for being you and for getting through tough times. So we're getting through it. It's, wow, what a year. I still feel like it's March in many ways, and it's not. Anyway. I'm hoping Halloween is good. I know. Oh, I don't know. Anyway, I'll be here next week, so hope you will too, for a brand new edition of TV Guidance Counselor.
I got a shit ton of merit badges.